Hi, it's Ian from the Postal Hub podcast.
And Marek from Last Mile Experts.
And we are the Last Mile Prophets. This is the last word on the last mile. Marek, mergers and acquisitions in the pandemic era in the last mile. It's an interesting
Very,
one.
very, very hot topic.
Right. So this is something that must be bubbling away in the background, is it, Marek? Because there's not a lot of headlines at the moment about it.
You know what, Ian? It's not something you hear about because if I'm a private equity fund or other organization seeking to buy a last mile operator, I'm not going to shout it from the treetops because I wouldn't want my competitors to hear. With
No.
one exception. Have you been observing what's happening in China?
With regard to Alibaba buying a bigger stake in, I can't remember which one.
Wasn't it? You know what? There's a couple of them because I
Yes.
always confuse. There's one. There's a ZTO
There's YTO. Yes.
and YTO. I think it was YTO.
I think it was.
But if you look at it, there's Alibaba, JD have just bought something, and I won't even try to remember the name. But it's happening in China, and that's very visible because they're big companies that have to, because they're listed, they have to state what they're doing. Private equity do not have to state what they're doing. And I can say that from the last mile experts perspective, we have never had so much interest before. And it's not in, there are specific country deals, which I can't talk about today, but there's also a general scenario where anything last mile is hot. That is really interesting.
Well, there are rumours swirling around in Australia, for example, about Amazon being interested in making an acquisition in the last mile, whether it's a Pudo network or perhaps even a last mile operator. The name that springs to mind there is that Japan Post is trying to offload toll. Well,
Oh, really?
that's
Oh,
what they say. So there all are these rumors, especially when Amazon's such a headline grabber, says the man who records so many videos about Amazon. But it's interesting that it seems to be happening right now, though, Marek. I mean, is this because there is this sudden explosion in e-commerce parcels, and there's thinking that this is a bandwagon we have to jump on before before all the deals are gone, before the not cut price, but before everybody else jumps in and prices skyrocket, basically.
I would suspect that cut price in the last mile is a thing of the past. And you're right. What happens is these are super smart guys and they analyze strategically what has happened and what is likely to ensue. So strategically, if you think about it, e-commerce, you're right, is exploding. E-commerce parcels are exploding, which has huge ramifications for the last mile. And then if you look at what COVID has done, do you remember the Jeff's flywheel for Amazon, which makes things go faster? So the flywheel here is COVID. So we've got parcels exploding, and then suddenly we've got a whole new group of people who would never use e-commerce before, maybe elderly people or senior citizens, I think is the PC word for that, or people who just don't really like tech type things, but they haven't had a choice during COVID. And actually, they found that it's quite convenient and liked it. So that's a new group of potential customers. And then the second group, I would say, are people who are already big users, but started buying new types of products. So perhaps medication of some kind, pharmacy, off-the-counter products, useful sort of sanitizing products.
This is true, but I want to throw another thing in here, and that is, and not many people are really talking about that, is that a lot of countries have introduced a sort of stimulus program and might have targeted people who have been temporarily laid off while during the downturn or whatever. And those people are all of a sudden cashed up and they are spending. And they are spending either online. They're either those established people who have increased, or they are the new to e-commerce people who have just started. And so they've got this money that they are spending, and that is contributing to the size of the boom in terms of e-commerce parcels. So that's sort of another factor that's sort of been influencing the size of the boom. Because if you've been laid off and all of a sudden you're on unemployment payments and you haven't got a lot of money, well, you're not going to be spending loads of money online. You'd be spending your bare minimum online, if that makes sense, Mark.
Well,
At the risk of descending into social commentary here.
you know what, Ian? Actually, this is a really good point because what tends to happen when you have a recession, and I think most people will agree that we are in recession in almost every
It's
labor.
official in Australia. They've announced it's an official recession.
So what happens in a recession? Ironically, the one segment that tends to grow is e-commerce, because if you're looking for a bargain, where do you go? You go online. So people, when there's a recession, people tend to look online. And once I looked at empirical evidence, I can't remember exactly what it was now, but a couple of years ago when we had difficult economic period, I think around about 2009 or something, what actually happened? E-commerce grew. So I think you make a very good point. It's not just the short-term cash effect. It's going to be
Yeah.
a recession effect, which will double up on that.
And I
And
would say, yeah, go on.
one last one
Yeah.
is we didn't talk about it fresh. So we talked about sanitizing products, OTC products, but the
Yeah.
other thing is people have been forced to buy food online, particularly if they've been.
And the major supermarkets have had to add to their fleets. We've seen a lot of coverage about this recently, about changes to last mile, whether it's offering time slot delivery, express delivery, within 30 minutes delivery, tie-ups with some of the gig economy delivery companies and all of that. So it has really gone gangbusters. But going back to your point about the last...
Ian, and we've had posts delivering, which is quite unusual, food products.
Yes, which is interesting. But those...
Of course.
Typically, though, they're looking at more of your non-perishables. You look at what Australia Post is doing. It's delivering packs for the two major supermarkets, but it's typically non-perishable stuffs. I wanted to quickly mention that last recession that you talked about, the global financial crisis it was called in many parts of the world, that was a time, though, that we had the iPhone coming out, increasing levels of mobile phone, internet usage, broadband penetration into homes. So that also contributed to that boom in e-commerce, and some various other local factors. For example, in Australia around that time, the dollar reached parity with the US dollar. Now that has significant implications for people's buying power. If you as an Australian are now able to buy things from the USA where things always looked cheaper but because of the exchange rate weren't cheaper, if all of a sudden now they are cheaper, Australia Post saw huge growth in parcels coming in from the USA when the Australian dollar reached parity with the US dollar. Now that the US dollar has returned to being strong compared to the Australian currency, people's shopping habits have sort of stuck, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean there?
But you know what, Ian? What you're talking about is another element where e-commerce widens your shopping area. You can buy internationally, not just domestically.
That's right.
Because it may be today that the US is interesting. It may be it's China tomorrow. It could be that it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
But what I think the key message is getting back to, we always do this, don't we?
I can't even remember what we're supposed to be talking about. I think it was mergers and acquisitions. But go on.
Indeed. So when we get back to that subject, the reality is that without a doubt, e-commerce is very, very attractive right now. And e-commerce absolutely relies on last mile delivery and that capability. So anything to do with last mile at the moment is very, very, very interesting. And I think let's watch this space. We're going to see the big players, and I would not be surprised if Amazon decides in certain markets to secure their interests by buying something, or actually just investing a fistful of dollars in setting up a capability somewhere. The Chinese have already shown that they're doing it. But what's important is that I think the stuff you don't see behind the scenes, where there's a lot of super smart people at private equity doing the maths and saying, my God, we need to get in here. I believe they're going to be two or more types of funds. One's going to be an infrastructure type fund, and they're going to be really interested in last mile infrastructure as a long-term play. And then they're going to be other funds that are going to say tactically, wow, last mile is hot today. We can see huge opportunity for growth and therefore for making money. So let's buy something today. In 5 years' time, we clean it up, or maybe we amalgamate a few companies in a certain last mile sector and make a fistful of dollars. So very, very interesting. And that's the stuff that you don't see. That's all below the radar screen, because what Amazon does, Alibaba does, JD.com does, etc., it's all visible. So very, very interesting.
Well, Marek, we've managed to fill time today talking about mergers and acquisitions without really talking about mergers and acquisitions, but I think there's a lot to mull over there. Comment below, let us know what you think about what we've discussed today, especially the tangents.
But Ian, what will be interesting is let's look back on this in 6 months' time, and then we'll see ex post how many deals happened. The ones that we haven't talked about, I think there's going to be some exciting stuff.
Marek Różycki, thanks for being part of the Last Mile Profits today.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone.